You absolutely love it when one of your players goes off. I mean, single-handedly wins you the week and makes you look like the greatest fantasy football manager of all time. But then the next week, you got to put out an APB. You got to put them on the back of a milk carton. They disappear single-digit fantasy points, and you're scratching your head thinking to yourself, how come this guy is so inconsistent? Headliner Nation, today we're going to be diving into the top 36 running backs based on current ADP and seeing just how risky and inconsistent they were last season and whether or not they can change their tune heading into 2025. And in my last video, I tasked our community with getting the video to 1,400 likes and I would give away a draft guide. But we failed miserably, so I'm willing to double down on this video. If we can get to 1,400 likes and this video can have 12,000 views in the first 24 hours that it's posted, I'll give away 2 draft guides. All you need to do is hit the like button on the video and leave a comment with your thoughts at any point in time during this video about the riskiest running backs from last season and what they look like heading into 2025. But make sure you subscribe as well. So if you are picked at the end of the video, because I promise we're hitting those marks, then you'll have an opportunity to win. And the concept of this video is super simple. What I do is I take a look at the top 36 running backs based on current average draft position. And then I go ahead and take a look at where those running backs finished each of their games last season. Did they finish as an RB1, an RB2, and RB3, or did they finish outside the top 36 running backs? And then each position is given a point value. 1 point for an RB1 finish, 2 for RB2, 3 for RB3, 5 points if you finished outside the top 36 running backs. And at the end of the video, we will take each player's final overall score, divide it by the amount of games they played last season, which will give us our risk score. The lower the risk score, the better they were last season, and the more consistent they were as well. One quick side note, for some reason, the data that I typically pull for this video has decided to start excluding week 18, which makes no sense to me. Listen, I don't care if a majority of you don't want to play in week 18 because I get it. You should never play a fantasy championship in week 18. But the argument to exclude week 18 fantasy points is stupid to me because when you take a look at players' overall statistics last season, do you subtract what they did in week 18? You don't. Include the points. But it doesn't matter. We're moving forward without week 18 and we're still going to get a whole lot from this video, so it is what it is. But would you have guessed that Jahmyr Gibbs had the most RB1 finishes last year? I know there's a certain group of people out there who don't. And it's the same group that argued against Jahmyr Gibbs all last draft season. He doesn't have the ceiling. He won't reach it. David Montgomery's a thorn in his side. Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery were poised for huge seasons together, and it absolutely showed. And Jahmyr Gibbs led the way with 10 RB1 finishes in 16 games last season. Now, right behind him, you had a few guys that were able to reach their ceiling quite a bit as well. Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley, and then you also have a lot of guys who finished with decent floors at times as well. James Cook, Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, Kyron Williams. Those are the type of guys that maybe they didn't finish with as many RB1 weeks as other people, but they still had some really consistent weeks. And we'll talk about their overall consistency towards the end of the video. The running back that took the biggest fall from my video I did last offseason to this season has to be Travis Etienne. This is a guy that finished the 2023 season with 8 RB1 performances. Last year, that's right, 0 RB1 performances from him last season. And now he's got even more competition in the backfield. Tank Bigsby had a very good year last year and at times was the clear better running back, especially on film. Now, Tank Bigsby isn't even included in this video because he's being drafted outside the top 36 running backs. But that's a guy who finished with 2 top 12 performances last year and 3 top 24 performances. He was better than Travis Etienne, and he's not being drafted like it. Now, there's also a few guys in here that probably could have finished with more RB1 weeks, but didn't for specific reasons. Guys like Chase Brown and Bucky Irving, because they weren't the starter to begin the season, and they had a path to getting those starter touches. But once they did, their numbers shot up. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we look at final overall score, though. Now, just a couple of minutes ago, I talked about a safe floor, and you find that with a whole lot of RB2 performances. RB1 performances are great, but RB2 performances are where people really establish a nice floor on a weekly basis. Guys that I talked about a minute ago. At the very top of the list, Derrick Henry and David Montgomery. But how about Alvin Kamara? Jake loves Alvin Kamara this year, and he finished with 8 RB2 performances last year, which was tied for the most in the league at the running back position. For Derrick Henry, we made the argument every single time in a video last offseason that Derrick Henry could lose a step and still finish as a solid RB2 with RB1 upside based on the touchdowns alone. Guess what? He gave you the touchdowns and he didn't lose a step either. So while he had really good upside every single week, he gave you a safe floor. And sometimes at the beginning of your draft, safety is what helps win championships, especially if you hit on those high upside players later on. David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs didn't keep him from being a safe option, and there's a good shot you're going to see his name in the RB2 column a lot in 2025 as well. Now, there are concerns about the changes on offensive line for the Detroit Lions, and I get that and I hear that. And while I do have a little bit of a concern that he does lose a little bit of his ceiling, he is still a very good running back. This is still a very good team. And even if he loses a few touchdowns, for where he's going to be drafted at, he is still going to be a value for you in terms of floor, as long as you don't set unrealistic expectations for upside. Josh Jacobs and Kyron Williams were right behind those guys with 6 RB2 finishes last year. And they're also the consistent floor players. Depending on when they're drafted this year, they could give you great value. But once again, they're the type of guys that you draft saying, hey, they're going to be RB1s every once in a while because they're going to score touchdowns and they're going to have good games. But if you can give me 6 RB2 performances and then give me half of the rest of the games as RB1 performances, I'm going to be happy more times than not putting you in my lineup. Now, when you talk about some inconsistent performances, that's where Joe Mixon's name is probably going to be talked about a little bit more at the end of the video. He gave us 7 RB1 performances last year, but only 1 RB2 performance. So that means he had to have finished way lower the rest of the games. How many though, and is it a cause of concern? Jordan Mason. One thing about Jordan Mason is while his overall score doesn't look that great, during the time in which he was a starter or Christian McCaffrey didn't play, he was a stud. If you were to just take those games into consideration, he would have been one of the best scorers in this metric last year. But because he was active in all of those games, except for the ones he was injured, obviously, when Christian McCaffrey was still playing, you're going to get a lower score. It's not going to look as great. Jordan Mason's score is not going to look great. It's going to be much higher than what it actually should be because he was active for a lot of games last year with Christian McCaffrey where he wasn't really doing anything at all. It's the games where there was no Christian McCaffrey and he was healthy where he would have been one of the best scorers in this metric last season. I love him in Minnesota this year, so it will be interesting to see how Jordan Mason works alongside Aaron Jones. And as long as they get a fair amount of snaps together, about 50% each, you're still going to find a guy that will probably put together a safe floor. Now, this is where things get really tricky, and that's when a running back finishes is an RB3, because it leaves a lot to be desired. As an RB3 performance, you're probably scoring single digits. An RB3 performance is like being at the beach on a hot day and only having a bottle of water that is somewhat warm. It's not cold, it's not refreshing, it's not quenching your thirst, But at the end of the day, it's better to drink it and stay hydrated than dying face first in the sand while little Susie builds a sandcastle over your corpse. And it's really interesting to note that there are 3 running backs that finished as tier 1 scores in overall score, which we'll take a look at here in a couple of minutes, that had more RB3 performances than 12 other running backs that finished in tier 2, 3, and 4. So while you may have more finishes as an RB3, it doesn't necessarily kill your consistency. And when we take a look at those running backs at the very end, more than likely you'll say, I loved having that guy on my team last season. Even if there was a few RB3 performances where you were like, I really wish this guy could have gotten me like 4 extra points or found the end zone because I would have won my week with that. But more times than not, you ended up being just fine with what they did. And how about Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris at the top of the RB3 finishes? 2 guys that absolutely killed each other's upside last season, mostly because of Arthur Smith and his inability to run an effective offense if Derrick Henry and A.J. Brown are not on it like he had with the Titans. But unfortunately, these 2 guys are going to be in the same situation once again. Jaylen Warren may be the incumbent starter right now, and Pittsburgh paid to keep him in tow this season, but they also drafted Caleb Johnson. And we just said it, Arthur Smith doesn't know how to effectively run an offense. Najee Harris looked to be locked in as an RB1 after signing a 1-year deal in free agency with the Los Angeles Chargers. And then they drafted Omarion Hampton. And this also can be confusing for fantasy owners out there, especially when they're watching our videos, because I'll do a video where I talk about how one of the most toxic backfields in fantasy this year is the Los Angeles Chargers because of Najee Harris, because of Omarion Hampton. I love Omarion Hampton. There are not very many people that spoke more highly of Omarion Hampton than I did during the draft process. And I love where he landed, especially for long-term value. But if Najee Harris is there in 2025, Najee Harris is going to get touches too. Omarion Hampton is not going to see enough RB1 performances to have this huge upside that you're banking on every single week. It could be more like what we see here, where we see quite a few RB3 performances mixed in with some RB2 to RB1 upside. And at the end of the season, you're going to be like, man, I really wish I didn't overdraft Omarion Hampton, and he may really not have that bad of a season, but when you take a look at it, you're going to feel like there should have been more just because he didn't have the upside that you wanted. But if a running back can turn those RB3 performances into RB2 performances, you'll feel great with them all season long. And that's what guys like Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara, David Montgomery, Josh Jacobs, and even Jahmyr Gibbs did. They didn't really finish in this area all that often because there was some explosiveness to their play. There was some things that they did correctly that while they had a really safe RB2 floor, they had enough upside to keep them out of more consistent RB3 finishes, which overall made their season that much better. This is where things go off the rails, finishing outside the top 36. You just can't have it. You cannot have a ton of weeks where you're not even startable, because if you finish outside the top 36 running backs, no chance you're helping your team win anything that given week. If you're a top tier running back, you're finishing outside the top 36 because you got injured or something happened and you didn't play the entire game. That's when those things occur. If you're finishing several games outside the top 36, you're going to be a really tough running back to own. There was only one running back last season that had 0 performances outside the top 36 running backs, but didn't finish in either tier 1 or tier 2 of the final scoring. That was Christian McCaffrey. But for those guys at the top of the list, there's lots of questions about them. Tyrone Tracy, will Cam Scatabo end up taking his job? That could absolutely happen if, unfortunately, Tracy keeps fumbling the football. Travis Etienne with 5. We already talked about him. Tank Bigsby looks like a better value at this point in time. What about guys that finished with 4 performances outside the top 36? Jaylen Warren, he's going to have Caleb Johnson this year. DeAndre Swift, is he really the answer in Chicago? Ben Johnson already didn't want him once in Detroit. Jordan Mason is going to have Aaron Jones. Bucky Irving's issue is the fact that he just was not the starter and relied heavy upon at the beginning of the season. That's where he had all of these performances. If you were running the numbers from the time he became the starter till the end of the season, he would be one of the best scorers in this situation as well. Breece Hall and Isaiah Pacheco are interesting ones. Breece Hall, a lot to do with their offense last year. Now, from a weapon standpoint, they haven't really upgraded. They added Mason Taylor through the draft, and they still have Garrett Wilson. Is Alan Lazard, Malachi Corley, are they going to be the guys to get it done on the outside with Garrett Wilson? Justin Fields, is he going to be good enough passing the football to keep people off of Breece Hall? That's why Breece Hall might be a little bit of a discount right now if you're willing to go with that risk. Isaiah Pacheco, you look at Isaiah Pacheco because he's with the Kansas City Chiefs and you say, this guy's got tremendous upside. But really everything we look at from a metric standpoint tells us Isaiah Pacheco doesn't have a high ceiling. He might have a decent floor, and he was banged up last year, but even when he's been healthy, he doesn't have a great ceiling. He's going to have some RB1 weeks, but if you're drafting him expecting him to be an RB1, you're going to be let down. All right, let's move on to final score. And right now, I don't have any of the rookies listed. We are going to list all of the rookies inside the top 36 ADP at the very end of the video to see if there's anybody from a rookie standpoint that we should be drafting over some of the riskier players. So we'll outline everyone based on their ADP, and then we'll talk more about the rookies at that point. But they don't have any NFL data from last season, so obviously they won't have a score here. There are 6 running backs that are considered tier 1 running backs in my risk score assessment. Those include Jahmyr Gibbs, Kyren Williams, Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, and Josh Jacobs. Maybe there's no shock to see these names at the very top here. And to see Jahmyr Gibbs with the lowest score, again, if you belong to a certain demographic that hated on Jahmyr Gibbs last season, maybe you're a little bit shocked. But not only was he a running back with the most upside last season, he was one of the most consistent and safest running backs last season, and he's very much worth whatever his ADP is this year. Right behind him is Kyren Williams, and this is where people may end up getting a little bit shocked. Now, Kyren Williams last season, 7 games inside the top 12, 6 inside the top 24. 13 of his 16 games, he finished as an RB2 or higher last season. So for those of you that hate Kyren Williams, there's no logical data to back it up. If it's a gut feeling, I get that. If you think Blake Corum is going to take more touches, I get that. But Kyren Williams has consistently been a safe, consistent running back over the last couple of years, and he is a guy that plays for a head coach that loves to utilize one running back. Bijan Robinson being up here, especially after the start to last season, probably helps some people feel a little bit better about drafting him higher this year. I do think Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs have the highest upside of any running backs this year. Tied with him was Saquon Barkley. Tied with him with Derrick Henry. Both of these guys had great floors last season. While Saquon Barkley had 9 top 12 finishes compared to Henry's 7, Henry had 8 top 24 performances compared to 4 from Saquon Barkley, and then Saquon Barkley, well, he had 2 more top 36 performances. And Josh Jacobs rounds out the tier 1 scores. Now, Josh Jacobs last season, he was the only running back in the tier 1 scores to also have a performance outside the top 36. The good news is he only had 1 performance as an RB3, tied with Derrick Henry and Jahmyr Gibbs for the fewest based on these tier 1 scores here. We had 5 running backs tie for a score of 2, which I don't think has ever happened in all the years I've been doing this data. These are our tier 2 players here: James Cook, Joe Mixon, Jonathan Taylor, Alvin Kamara, and David Montgomery. Now, for all of these players, all of them had at least 1 performance outside the top 36. Joe Mixon led this group with the most RB3 performances at 4. Right behind him was Jonathan Taylor with 3. So for a majority of the performances here, a lot of these guys gave us really decent upside. They gave us decent upside for RB1 performances, but unfortunately, they did fall outside the top 36 for 1 or 2 games. And then for the people who scored a little bit lower here, they had some RB3 performances to go with it. So when you take a look at a guy like Joe Mixon, 4 times finished as an RB3. Jonathan Taylor, 3 times finished as an RB3. Those 2 guys, that's that area I talked about where you feel like you're drinking a warm bottle of water. Both of those guys, I mean, Joe Mixon kicked it up at the beginning of the season, was great. Jonathan Taylor didn't really do anything until the end of the season when he scored almost 50% of his points and 50% of his production at the very end of the year. That's where things do become a little bit more inconsistent. And if they can take some of those RB3 performances and knock them up into the RB2 range, they would have been tier 1 scores. So how do we feel about both of those guys heading into 2025? Tier 3 is a doozy. There are a ton of running backs listed here. Anybody that scored higher than 2 but lower than 3 in their risk assessment score. So let's go ahead and run through some of these guys here rather quickly. Chase Brown. Obviously, if it hadn't been for the first few games of the season when he wasn't really the starter, his score probably ends up being a lot higher. This is still a pretty impressive score, given the fact that 4 of his games really didn't mean much at the beginning of the season. Kenneth Walker. This is another score for a guy that has dealt with injuries that's pretty impressive, because it shows you that while, there's been times where he's been injured and he hasn't played all that well, when he's healthy, he's one of the better running backs in the NFL. Chuba Hubbard is a guy that was really the guy all season long. And when you see 5 games is an RB3 or lower, that's really going to hurt your overall score. It's going to give you a wide range of outcomes. It's going to tell you that he could be very touchdown dependent, he could be very volume dependent, but he may not have a ton of big plays to give you that upside consistently that you want. Devon Achane might be the most interesting player in this set right here, because when you take a look at Devon Achane, he's being drafted 14th. Him and Christian McCaffrey are the highest rated ADPs in this area. And we'll talk about them in just a second when we get to listing the outcome of the ADPs along with the rookies. But this is a guy that had 8 games as an RB1. Absolutely love it. Winning upside. But then he put together 6 games as an RB3 or lower. Absolutely hate it. You're spending a top 24 pick on a guy that could either win your week or basically lose your week, and that's not good. James Conner is going to be another guy that pops up a lot this season. Very, very good last year. We saw some really good ceiling from him, but again, 5 games, top 36 or lower. Aaron Jones, now that he has Jordan Mason to push him along a little bit, you got to wonder if Aaron Jones loses some of that upside. 5 games as an RB2, 5 games as an RB1. If some of those RB1 games coming down into the RB2 territory and Jordan Mason ends up being a little bit safer, Jordan Mason may end up being the better value. There are a couple of guys that I was not shocked at all to see this low in the overall risk assessment score. Tony Pollard, one of those guys. He's going to have a safe floor. He's not going to give you a ton of upside. He had 5 RB1 performances last season, 5 RB3 performances. Wouldn't be shocked if some of those RB1 performances fell to RB2. Just didn't have the upside, but on a weekly basis as your flex option, it's not that bad. Brian Robinson Jr., 3 games as a top 12 running back, 4 games RB2, 4 games RB3. Again, a guy that he's going to give you a safe floor. As a flex option, he's going to give you RB3 games with some RB2 upside. Hard to ask for a whole lot more than that as your flex position. And then kind of the same thing with Najee Harris. 6 games as an RB2, 6 games as an RB3. With Omari and Hampton, you could end up seeing a lot of the same thing this year, where maybe more than not, he's just going to be a flex play that you throw in there that you know is going to get you some points because of the offensive scheme that he's going to be in. Here's where things get super risky. Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, and DeAndre Swift. Christian McCaffrey in only 4 games, 2 RB2 performances, 2 RB3 performances. For him, it's not really about the performances at the end of the day. It's about staying healthy. But 7.9 ADP is really, really spicy for a guy that has 2 seasons under his belt over the last 4 years where he just couldn't make it on the field. Breece Hall, 5 RB1 performances, which is great, but then 4, 2, and 4. Cannot have that. Are you willing to bank on him? Needing to draft him is probably your RB1. Maybe is your RB2. A little bit less risk associated with that. But does he have that upside this year? And then DeAndre Swift, 6 games last season as an RB3, 4 games outside of RB3 status, new offensive scheme, new head coach, good players around him, better offensive line. Everything points to DeAndre Swift being better this season. You just have to hope that he actually is. And I already mentioned Bucky Irving as well kind of earlier in this video. This is a guy who, if he had played more at the beginning of the season and was utilized better, then this score is way, way higher because those games where he didn't finish well were typically towards the beginning of the year. Tier 4, the worst performers. Let's talk about these guys real quick. Tyrone Tracy, 6 games outside the top 36, and mainly because he wasn't even the starter until halfway through the season. Had some fumble issues. That is going to be something to keep an eye on with Cam Scatabo. Jordan Mason, when he did play and he was the starter or Christian McCaffrey was hurt, he was by far one of the best guys in terms of these scores. If you take those games and those games only, I don't think he has a tremendously high upside with Aaron Jones in Minnesota. But based on what we saw, I do think he could be really, really safe there if utilized correctly. Jalen Warren, 7 games as an RB3 last season. He's going to have to be way better this year, but his ADP may make him a very, very deep sleeper for you. Travis Etienne at this point, 5 games top 36, 5 games outside of it with Tank Bigsby and 2 in there right now. I don't know how we can rely on Travis Etienne. I know they've had some wonderful things to say about him, but I don't think he's worth his ADP. You can get a better deal with Tank Bigsby later on. And Isaiah Pacheco, the worst score here. And go back to what I said about him a minute ago. You look at him with the Kansas City Chiefs and you get super excited about his potential upside, but you can't draft him for his upside because he doesn't have upside and all the metrics point to it. He has a safe floor. He's going to give you some RB1 performances here or there, but more times than not, if you draft him looking for ceiling, you're not going to get it. All right, final thing to note. We are going to take a look at the current ADP in order with risk score next to them from last season. So we can talk about the rookies being drafted right now and what the ADP looks like compared to the scores for some of these players. The first thing that stands out for me is Christian McCaffrey, Devon Achane, and Breece Hall. Each of these guys, even with a tier 3 score, are being drafted pretty high. If you take a look at a guy like Christian McCaffrey, he's being drafted over really, really solid safe bets. Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, and Kyren Williams. Kyren Williams may be the most disrespected member of this video because he's being drafted after Breece Hall, Chase Brown, Josh Jacobs, Bucky Irving, Jonathan Taylor, Devon Achane, Christian McCaffrey. All of these guys that scored either tier 2 or tier 3, and Kyren Williams isn't even being considered really above any of them right now. David Montgomery, also probably a guy that is being disrespected about as much. Because if you take a look at him, scored a solid 2. He was in tier 2 this season. His ADP puts him at 70.9 right now. People are drafting rookies over him. Travion Henderson, RJ Harvey, Omarion Hampton. Really the only one that I will say, yeah, I'm fully on board with is Ashton Genty, all the way up where he is right now at 11.6. Now keep in mind, this is best ball ADP. So a guy like Omarion Hampton and even RJ Harvey, you could kind of argue that maybe they have a little bit more upside. And because in best ball, you want to risk it a little bit more, that's why people are going that route. But even then, David Montgomery should be over Travion Henderson and honestly, Alvin Kamara and James Conner for me as well. Guys at the bottom of the ADP here doesn't shock me a whole lot. Najee Harris is completely tumbled at this point. The fact that Najee Harris is going behind Tyrone Tracy, Travis Etienne, Jalen Warren. You can make an argument for Brian Robinson Jr., Tony Pollard. That's crazy in my opinion. Again, best ball ADP, and probably one of the reasons why he's going so low, because people don't think he has a ton of upside, and I get it, but the ADP just doesn't match up with the numbers that we're seeing on screen. Headliner Nation, make sure you remember to hit the like button on the way out. 1,400 likes, I'll give away 2 draft guides. As long as this video gets 12,000 views in the first 24 hours it's out. TFHDraftGuide.com. The link is in the description below. Go on over there, get your draft guide right now. Headliner Nation, stay safe, stay healthy. Hopefully you appreciated the video. Let me know if you did in the comments, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.